Shirley here with Jupiter Point of Thales. And as a sequel to my previous video, for those of you who watch me on BitChute, I was talking about astrology from the experience of astrologer and astrology and the future of humanity from a different point of view. There is what prompted me to press record, and then there is with the time where I birthed that video and I let it out to the world, and there is the aftermath. And that aftermath um, was an understanding. I was thinking about the Centaurians. What is the role of the Centaurians? And the Centaurians are people that live to 100, and I'm specifically talking about the Centaurians um, that are like Kissinger, that have played a major role in the design of decisions, okay, that affect the world as we see it. So, let's talk about astrology. And when we think about astrology, and we think about the Centaurian, we think about something that's going to be 1/5 of Aries cycle, Neptune-Pluto cycle, and 1/12, not 1/12, but 1 to the 24 of a Sedna cycle. The reason I'm doing this attempt live with you is because I think understanding that and having that gigantic picture perspective can help us understand the role of the Centaurian and perhaps better adapt. Because when we think about figures like Henry Kissinger, um, there is also how the Centaurian is seen by the public, and there's also what the Centaurian knows and doesn't know, and there's also the how much exposure is there for the Centaurian to the correct information that they need, okay, to do what their job is. So the Centaurian, the man who lives to 100, has to prepare for very likely at least one global scale conflict. A change of the structures of the world. Depending on the time the Centaurian is born, and what transit will they undergo and at what age. For example, going through an important Uranus transit when you are before your mid-40s is different than going through that transit after your Uranus opposition. Same with other planets. And that Centaurian has to be prepared. They have to understand the fiscal logic of currency changes. That Centaurian has to understand what is the trajectory of religious, spiritual, philosophical perceptions in the coming century. And those have to be adjusted to the transits. For example, we saw with Rahu in Aries, a high rise in Baphomet, which is the god of the horns. I'm not saying this is good or bad, but this is a trajectory. Okay, on a very large scale, we can predict that the rise of horn gods at the time of Aries, Rahu, would be significant. With understanding what is, okay, we are heading to 15 years of that, but also the dissolution of these horn gods, because we're heading to Neptune. The character of Neptune is to dissolve something, and it conjuncts Saturn. So it's both to make something go viral, but also to dissolve something. You think about a dilution. Think about the dilution in a drop of poison in an ocean of the waters. And I'm being very optimistic here. But Aries is also Ares. Okay, so this is one example. You think about Pisces as Christianity, the symbol of the fish. Aquarian as a more relaxed, more atheistic. We have Pluto in Aquarius, a relaxing of theism. And Pluto can go to extreme. With sextile, the horn gods, it can be indeed what people call an antichrist, but also the dissolution of the antichrist, which can bring a more mundane forms of secularism. So this is just the very near, okay, a couple of decades. Then Pluto will go into Pisces and transform Christianity or whatever. So let's have, okay, let's take a look at what the Centaurian within the scope of 100 years. And if you look at my previous video where I discussed NATO, and you see clearly why that is. It's not why we have a war every 100 years. Well, if you want to have a military and you want to give that military as much time as it can without war, you are dependent on the outer planets, especially the outer planets that could trigger a global scale war, and you want to have as much space in between them while not compromising your Mars, which is your war, okay, to do your competence at war if you need to have one. This is broadcasted to you not as whistleblowing, but as remediative. Because when we understand that, then we understand why there is war when there is war. It's not because we're bad people or we're practicing the wrong religion. What type of religious philosophical views are underlying that war? And looking at Mars is essential. Okay, what art of war are we practicing? Neptune with Mars is also medical war, but also spiritual war, unfortunately. But it's also the dissolution of war. It's also pacifism. It's all these things together. And the sextile to a perhaps more refined form of secularism. So it's both understanding what would be, how much can we postpone war, what is the realistic passage, Because let's say if right now we have Neptune in Aries, very likely the next NATO-like organization will either have to have Mars, hopefully not in Leo, but then hopefully not in Scorpio either. And then if we dissolve NATO after 1939, we might be able to give ourselves time with having a military organization with Mars in Scorpio, but then that would entail the nature of war that is scorpionic, and this is challenging to say the least. Yet if we stay with NATO, it means that as Pluto ingresses into Aries, we're gonna have another one, and it's only 20 years space. Another option that we absolutely do have is Mars in Capricorn. That might be a war that 50 years war, because if you think about Pluto going through Capricorn for 15 years and you think it's triggering the nature of Saturn cycle, depending on when Saturn is, and even not dependent, Saturn has a 28 years, so depending on that it can be ranging from 30 to 50 years of war. And yet having 15 years activation to our war planet, and then 20 years space, and then another, okay, around 15 years activation is also, it means that we will only have 20 years before another 50 years. But then 30 to 50 years of war is also not preferred. It's a big question now. With wars, a change of currency ensues. It's not necessarily because we want to destroy humanity, and this is what I had to understand as well, and have access to that with astrology. It's because everything changes, the technology changes, the spiritual changes, the form of exchange changes, and we think about the currency as a talisman, and a military organization as a talisman, and states as a talisman. The states, the whatever, now we call it states, whatever, all these talisman of organizations and beings and forms, they need to coincide in as much harmony as we can within that system of systems. And then there are the discoveries around astrology, okay? For example, before we knew about Sedna, we might try to go for the planets that we know, and then we have this planet and that planet and that planet, and then the spirit of the times affects how we see the planets. Did you know that Beta Persei, okay, the goddess for the Rosh HaSatan, okay, the head of Satan, okay, it sounds like a bad nickname to your wife, don't use it, that she was a fertility goddess before the times where, okay, before the times where the goddesses were a little bit confiscated, and a fertility goddess became the goddesses that defended you from rape. It's when we discovered that sperm is also needed to make babies. So Centaurian has to be able to coincide with all these things. Like, you're gonna have a war, you're gonna have a currency change. Those are the things that people might believe. And believe it or not, just the gap between the big picture and the smaller picture in itself is challenging enough. Now, let's say you have the horn god, Okay, let's say you have Baphomet. Now, Baphomet is a union of polarities and then a dissection into polarities. Okay, if that's all you got, and it's not moderated by secularism, which is going to be, fortunately, if we tap into it, then then having a living baby buried with a dead one looks like a good polarity to unionize. Okay, it is insane. Uh, if that's all you got, this is what people will be operating. This is what people will believe. A Centaurian has to know where is Aries. Now, if this is what people will believe, how able are we to bring it to the people that those horned gods entails those living babies with the dead, and that is also the form of the currency, which is talismanically in spirit and in matter imbues in how you buy your milk. And how do we get humanity to think twice about that and perhaps think about other types or other forms of belief, for example, Kantian logic, which is also Aries, and the notion that if everybody did that, would we still want to live in this world? That is one tip I would give to the Centaurian. Is a tiny fraction of Kantian logic is not full, but it's another form that coincides with the Aries archetype that might be remediative to those things, okay? But the Centaurian has to also realistically appraise what would be the conditions, and within that's the structure. And realistically appraise is a very misleading term because they are tremendously isolated from with the ability to see what every person thinks. They can do astral projection, a shape shifting, but there is a lot of first of all, we are constrained with the limitations of our charts. Okay, we can only reach. There are certain charts that we meet in life, and those encounters are wow. Um, and there are only so many charts that we are going to draw in. That's going to affect our worldview. There are actually people whose job is to match one chart with another, one person with another. And that is creating, okay, those understandings between people and advancement, hopefully, of humanity. So the Centaurian also has to understand what will currency mean in the coming century with as much context as we can, which means 500 cycle, 1200-year cycle, is very challenging. With Sedna, it is indeed 1 to the 12th because it's 100 years. When will the Centaurian begin to act? Now, the Centaurian, you want to think about it a little bit like the crown, okay? You're born, and naturally, there's a certain age where you begin to act. And there's a certain age where you have to understand where in your century, when will the war be? How long will it take? And what will be the form of the new currency? What will be the form of the entities that are born after this war? And in recent centuries, we had bad aspects for the moon, bad aspects for the fourth house. Can humanity sustain with another century of such elections? And if yes, are we going to achieve what we want for humanity, which is ability to intergalactically coexist, which I addressed in previous episode? It's a question, okay? Without the moon, the sun is a problematic. One chart where I saw, remember, particularly chart tropical view of chart of China, there was the dignity of the sun was halfway, which basically is compatible with not losing mandate of the heaven, not to have the leaders so strong. And the Centaurian has to think about themselves a little bit as a king as well, or a queen, because the Centaurian has to think of themselves in that way, um, as they are going to design for these structures. They will take place in electing dates for declarations of independence. Whatever you think about, let's say, the Irish people rebelling, there are charts for those declarations of independence. The Centaurian is not necessarily coming from one or the other point of view. They think structurally, how will that structure go with that structure? You want to think about the state of Israel and the fact that Israel has midheaven on Procyon and ascendant on Spica that allows Israel immunity with both good and bad implications when it comes to, for example, crimes against humanity. So a lot of immunity, but with Spica there can be also justice, so whatever form it takes, but it's also advocacy for Israel, which is challenging but possible. And with Procyon, it is the favored, but also the sweetener of the verdict, and it's the denucleaficator. Israel serves as a juncture between the East and the West. Okay, that is what its structure is. Strong presence of Leo. It's my sixth house, a lot of health problems. But this is me, it's not the country. And so strong presence, okay, both malefics in Leo, Pluto in Leo at the time, and the sun in the eighth house. So the sun is owned by, that ensures that the leaders in Israel do not get too tyrannical over their own region. Okay, that means that if you hate the leaders of Israel, what you hate is those who fund them that do not come from Israel itself. We have a lot of charts with sun in the eighth house. As for position of the moon, if position of the moon is too compromised, then we basically don't have leadership. I think Banana Republic is, and that also means that we don't have the moon, and without the moon, which is the greatest manifesto, we cannot go and become intergalactic. Now, the reasoning for that might be that in previous centuries there were the beliefs that the systems of beliefs does not allow we the people or the common people to go into other galaxies. Um, and let's say if we have um, religious beliefs that are not supportive of good combination of a yin and a yang, I have to very sadly admit that this is true. Even the view that the sky punishes the land is incompatible with intergalactic, because the sky that punishes the land loses mandate of the heaven. Just logos, okay, just apply for Kantian logos. And it's also shamanic logos, shamanic teaching, we know that. okay, would we emasculate or would we decrease of feminine, is not compatible with intergalactic. Um, so if at that time this is what humanity believes, or this is the sets of possibilities that humanity is open to receive. And here is another challenge of the Centaurian that is any challenge across structure. For example, I know from people who are associated with religion, with Jewish religion, that rabbinical institutions, rabbis, they don't actually believe you need a circumcision, but they also don't believe that the people will follow them in their teachings if they one day say, we don't need a circumcision. Although if you read the Bible, you see that God insisted with Abraham, what do you need? This is not godly. I'm telling you, you don't have to sacrifice your child. And indeed, there was insistence on flesh, something of the flesh that is pagan. It's nothing monotheistic. And the first religion of monotheism that we know is Judaism. It's not Jewish, okay? Now, the rabbis know that, but they fear that the public is not ready for that teaching. This is also a challenge that the Centaurian has to deal with. Is sometimes you think the people will never, like the people won't get it. This is also why I'm broadcasting this video, that let the Mercury Aries person try and see if the people get it. And so the more the people can get it, and the more there is belief, because those, you know, even when you are a Centaurian or you are a royalty, then people are still having their own biases, for their own heritage, their own seclusion, their own blind spots. I was listening to channeling of Queen Elizabeth as Queen Elizabeth passed away, and what came through the channel was that Queen Elizabeth was not aware. She was thinking all the time about power. She says this type of role, you think a lot about power and preserving power, and she was not aware that she could do more for humanity and for the people. Very simply put, she was not aware of her power. So there's more than one Centaurian, and the charts of the Centaurians matter. They also have to be able to work with one another. They have to be compatible with the spirit of the times. And we recently lost some of them. Okay, whether it was I think Rothschild, and whether it was Henry Kissinger, and this is where people those are the people that are in charge of. If you're going to plan for the war, then those are the people that are also in charge of who will and who won't make it through the war. Those are the people that we see running the big wars. They're usually not known as Nobel Prize winners. Very rarely they are. And yet, when you look at the astrology, you understand that if you're going to be a Centaurian, there's some war you're going to need to, there's some war that's going to be, unless you're going to dissolve for your ability to prepare for war. Or to negotiate, or to combat, or to protect, or to defend, which is a part of the roles of Mars. You can choose of whether, for what type and every war, is big, every war is problematic. So with Aries, there are a lot of innovations, technological innovations. But with Scorpio, it is not a war that we want to have. But I would try very hard not to put anything in Scorpio that would be activated in a war. And yet, any Pluto transit to Scorpio will, or outer planet Scorpio will trigger that Mars as well. Okay, so it's not that there's not going to be anything. It's just that how much are you willing? For example, NATO chart is very compacted with Aries, just to pay attention that while that would be triggered with the Pluto Scorpios and with the Pluto Capricorns and with the Neptunes, it is not going through for what now we are scheduled to go through. Mars in Capricorn is exalted. It's a strong Mars. Um, it is also a Mars that has duration, and usually with that, it's a duration. Okay, so the role of the Centaurian is to choose between this type of war, that type of war, and that type of war. What would be the context for those wars? What would be the art of war? What would be the context of the times? How are the outer planets? So now we have the outer planets in a B6 It's very protective. It can also be very protective of things that we don't want it to be protective of. But it can also be protective of the good things for humanity. And it's challenging, genuinely challenging to see what is good for humanity for this time. Because trying to go with something is very good for humanity, but humanity doesn't even see that, would give a traumatic experience that is antidotal to the experience we want humanity to have. When it comes to trade, a Centaurian has to be aware of the facets of trade. That means all the facets of trade. If there are rituals that are done around trading, the Centaurian needs to know them and usually to participate. This is why you see all the pedo rings, because children are traded. Okay, what we are negotiating, when we are negotiating children, when negotiating peace, is children whole and in parts. This is the currency. It's money laundered into. But the fact that it's money laundered into does not mean that the Centaurian can just ignore that reality. This is why you see most of the world leaders having a picture with an Epstein, with a Détroit. It's not something that we want to have in the world. But unless we make sure that this is no longer a reality in the world, this is what every Centaurian will have to go through as an infant. And by the time that they are a Centaurian or even planning to be one, and some of them, we have some Centaurians that decided to take a break from being a Centaurian, that they were liquidated as a result of that. That means very likely that they didn't agree to do what the next level of what Centaurian has to do. Now, the question is, how can we build a Centaurian and provide for a Centaurian with minimal trauma for humanity and for the Centaurian? If we talk about Aries archetype, one good thing to know is Kantian logic, which might not be perfect, but it beats the hell out of Satanism when it comes to what you have to do to children to get a job. With that notion, you want to think about Scorpio. And for Scorpio, you want to plan for the well water to be as clear as possible. A lot of the environmentalism that we see today is frowned upon and is resisted to. You know that the oil and gas giants, it's not that they are resistant for no reason, it's that they were being uh, grown and pampered and lured and ushered into just do it. I have witnessed a person who was investor in the discovery of, I think it is gas in next to Israel, between Israel and Lebanon, and I remember the burst. Okay, it was a conference, an economic conference. I worked at an insurance company. I called myself sick, and then I told them that I'm from insurance company, so I got in. I knew it would be good for my company, and I knew that to explain that would be too lengthy, so I just did what the right thing to do. And I was open for innovation and increase for both good for the company and for my good. And this was a moment where you see for when they found that there is gas, the amount of resources convincing that goes into that. And once you find out, the money launderers are all after you. That's children whole and in parts. That's people whole and in parts. Now, if you happen to be lucky, actually at that insurance company, one of my bosses invested in that, seeking of, or you might invest in and come up with nothing. And for that day where he came up with something, okay, that can go between you'll never have, you will work 2 3 jobs and sleep in a car, to you'll be having a house and perhaps a couple of those, which can flip the other way around as well. But this is that's the moment. So you understand that you don't get that investment without tremendous amount of support, that by the time you actually make money and return for your investment, now they tell you to go environmental. This was your life mission, and everybody tells you that this is going to be the thing, and then the carpet is here's the carpet is swiped from underneath your feet that you built your whole life for, and you're told that's going to be the thing, that's going to be the thing, that's going to be the thing. You don't hear about the pollution. And when you do, you think about, well, the bigger picture is more energy for humanity to sustain itself. But what we're taught to think is, oh, you think about money, you think about money, you think about resources. Depending, in some areas you say, yes, you think about money, that's what you're taught to think. It's also what you're taught to say. But essentially how money is made is with resources, or the bubble of, the image of. And that is where you think about money. Now that bubble pops. When that bubble pops, people lose mandate of the heaven. So the Centaurian sometimes has to know when the bubble is going to pop. Now, if anything, for anything touches Scorpio, you want the well water to be very, very clear, because that's going to change the nature of the Scorpio archetype you're dealing with. You cannot be ashamed of sexuality, but you can also not be rapey. Both shame and rapiness will get your Scorpio transition to be downright traumatic. And that pertains also to the taboo topics like what, how you make your money. If you don't want the currency to be children holding in parts, money laundered into oil and gas, you damn well have to make sure children are not raped and people are not raped. And you don't have a Puritan story around the sexuality as well. It's the waters of the well. You want to be having good forests because they filter the water, good air quality. Okay, you can't be fooling around with that. You can't have the image of money. It has to actually be wealth. Now you go to wealth, you go to beta per se. All currency changes in this day and age around beta per se. Also in the Second World War, women could open a bank account afterwards, but that was because 2 generations of men died, and women had to take over the business. And then they could vote, because then it was no, if she didn't vote, then she couldn't run her business properly and be represented. It was bad for the economy. So Beta per se, before she was the head of Satan, she was a fertility goddess. And I think this one is going for the tube. If you misunderstand that, then your currency story, okay, is problematic. Then you ask, well, surely how can I bridge that to humanity? Well, this is what I'm here for. I'm the one with the Mercury in Aries. I'm the brave person that has the guts to tell this to both the people that are the Centaurians, and you better bet they listen, and to the people. Humanity, how do we know who the Centaurians are? They're going to be at around their 30s and 40s, around the Uranus Beta per se. So if you ask about me, no, I'm not a Centaurian. Okay, just to make that clear. And you ask if I know a Centaurians. I know, I think at least of one figure that I believe is ascribed to be a Centaurian. Um, if you ask if I know of what are stories I suspect of people that were supposed to be Centaurians but walked away, JFK is one of the most prominent one. Shinzo Abe less known. Um, and in Netherlands we had Peter R. de Vries. I think you got the answer for the former question as well. So this is a little bit about the role of the Centaurian. Why are they so hated? And what is the reality behind what they need to be a Centaurian? And when we address that, then we can begin to address solutions and point of interferences where they don't have to go through these horrid things or be in charge of these horrid things, where the things are less horrid, to be very particular. And we have declarations of independence, whether galactically or locally, or okay, planet Earth, that have better placements for the moon and refined placements for the sun. And that is important when we talk about declarations of independence. So of course, Centaurians, there is more than one. Um, what can you do? What you can do is, first of all, be aware that this is the reality. What you can do is not succumb to the gaslighting, whether it's your lineage, your culture, your religion and spiritual views, and keep in mind that this is the reality. Okay, there's going to be a war. It's going to be lengthy. We're going to be aware, have to be aware of the global, okay, the common denominator of the global view of war, of relationship between genders, of currency, of morality, and our strategies have to be compatible to make that common denominator something you can live with. So I have witnessed spies. I sat at the Friday dinner in the pipe, actually, this is the Chabad house, and there was a guy that was spy. I said, I'm waiting for 5 years to be in Netherlands so they can no longer stay. You say you cannot stay here. And he was, of course, married to a very young Asian. A little bit older man, yes. And he says there's no such, I've been all the world, there's no such thing as human rights. So this is the position of the person who is meant to do the spying. I didn't get any insider information. It was all he said, and he was very smart to keep it at that, I guess. So this is a perspective of the spy, okay? For the perspective of the Centaurian, you have to ask yourself, how do I keep this thing as sane as possible? Granting that there are people who cannibalize on their enemies, there are people who prepare shamans by torturing them in the womb, and some of these people are elite family, okay? Like you don't know which culture, okay? Um, there are people that believe that the sky punishes the land. There are people that believe that you lose the mandate of the heaven. There are people that believe that death is preferred. There are people that believe that the sanctity of life is so important that if you had a baby from rape, then you should keep it. And you have to accommodate for your strategies and for your the social engineering of what messages we send the public that they can accommodate for, and all these things together. And there is also the bias of how you grew up, which is it's a good bias, bad bias. It's a bias, okay? It says your point of perception, and the fact that the currency is going to change in that century. There are going to be financial crisis, and people say, "Oh, the financial crisis is manufactured." The financial crisis, a change in the finances or in the resources is coming. How we're going to adapt is, and how we're going to capitalize, or whatever is the fiscal beliefs around that time. That's how people respond to that. And then, of course, we have the picture of sustaining humanity, the picture of the vantage point of Earth, the picture of the vantage point of any extraterrestrial communication, and the picture of the common people. Those are distinct levels of analysis that show different points of view, and most points of views are not available, which is each and every sovereign point of view. We may have AI to computate, astral spies, whatnot, but when it comes to actually comprising a full picture, uh, we the ambition is very big and very relevant, because to sustain as humanity, going intergalactically is just practical thinking. Um, and yet to sustain us individuals, okay, perhaps it is good to keep in mind that as we ground ourselves, then uh, uh, we can climb up the chakras. Okay, root chakra is connected with crown chakra, but the very practice notion that let's say you work your garden, then you think about, oh, how can I work my garden in a way that I can also take care of my kids, and then how can I work my garden in a way that leaves a legacy, and so on. That something will grow here, even if there is famine, there is this, there is that, and then you go and then you take a vacation. You travel to other places to see what other gardens and other things. So basically, by going into the ground, you go on air, and then you think, well, how can I grow my garden in a way that if we grow it on Mars, it will still grow? Let me tell you something: the half moons on Mars is still a beginning of something that we might want to try. So I already have something that is good to experiment with. It is not I invented. And those bigger pictures, when you tend to them, is sometimes by the little picture. It's sometimes by me growing, a garlic and a couple of things, and then the makler, okay, the real estate agent, complaining of why we don't have enough water. We know this, we don't that. So how can I grow something without for this help of water? And I was like, okay, could we do that on Mars? Probably yes. Would it change the entire climate of the ecosystem of the global galaxy? Yeah, it's not the first time we do it. Would it be good for him? Who knows? Let's try it. I mean, it grew forests in Sahara. Um, so I hope that this view that is coming from perspective of astrology manages to bridge. Here, talk about the point of Tali, manages to bridge between those hidden, not so hidden, or those people that we humanity loves to hate, and for the actual reality. And I hope that, if you ask what is your point of interference, if the more we have of good growing with love, not ignoring if there is ritual abuse, not hiding underneath it's my culture, it's my religion, it's my this, it's my that, but also not going into blame shame. Okay, the more each culture do that, the more each person tends to that, the less job for the Centaurian to try to breach through things and go through things that might make it very, very challenging for them to even keep being alive, even when they have families. So thank you for watching.